The 2nd of May, 1986 remains one of the most important days in rallying history. A tragic accident at the Tour de Corse not only took the lives of Henri Toivonen and Sergio Cresto, but turned the future of the sport upside down. Almost immediately, FISA, the sport's governing body, announced the banning of Group B at the end of the season, and critically, the planned Group S follow-up class was also scrapped. That decision shuffled some of rallying's most outrageous machines into the shadow realm before they ever got a chance to race. This video is about those mythical cars. But a quick bit of context first. Announced in 1985 and set to start in 1987, though entrants wouldn't be eligible for championship points until 1988, Group S was a rule set designed to encourage technical innovation more than ever before. At least in some ways. Group B had virtually no limits when it came to power outputs, whereas Group S mandated a maximum of 300 brake horsepower. On the flip side, while Group B rules stated that manufacturers had to produce 200 road-going versions of the cars they intended to rally, Group S dropped that number to just 10. The intention being to encourage greater experimentation with exotic materials and to afford greater developmental freedom to manufacturers, at least outside of pushing loads of power. Other requirements included limitations on aerodynamics, I wonder why they did that, mandatory steel roll cages, I wonder why they did that, and mandatory crash tests, I wonder why they did that. It may never have seen the light of day in a competitive sense, but with over a year separating Group S's announcement and its untimely cancellation, you won't be surprised to learn that several manufacturers designed and in some cases developed and built prospective entries. Let's do it. I couldn't make a video on Group S without discussing one of the most recognisable cars of this era. Having won the Manufacturers' Championship in 1983 with its 037 and produced an absolute missile in the Delta S4, Lancia wasn't about to be caught napping with the new regulations. The brainchild of Sergio Limone, the ECV sported Kevlar and carbon fibre bodywork. Composite materials were also used for the driveshaft and wheel rims, while the front of the chassis sported steel tubing that could be easily replaced in the event of a crash. I wonder what gave them that idea. But it was Claudio Lombardi, a Bath's technical director, who was responsible for the ECV's greatest innovation. The car kept the same 1.8-litre four-cylinder engine as the infamous Delta S4, which famously utilised both a turbo and a supercharger. Lombardi replaced the supercharger though, with a second turbocharger that used two small turbines as opposed to one large one. The system initially directed airflow to one turbine, thereby ensuring it was ready at low revs, but from 5,000 to 8,000 RPM, the airflow was split between both turbines to achieve maximum power. The system, dubbed Triflux, was essentially an early example of two-stage turbocharging. Lancia redesigned the cylinder head to achieve what's called a cross-flow scheme. Now, that sounds boring, but it's actually genius. Most engines will have an intake valve, or multiple, on one side of the combustion chamber and an exhaust on the other. Lancia's 4-valve per cylinder design placed an intake and exhaust valve on both sides, diagonally opposed to one another. The result was more uniform heating and cooling of the engine, and much better plumbing and packaging. This allowed for significantly better long-term thermal stability, which gave Lancia the option to increase boost and compression without fear of weak points or excessive wear. With exotic materials, eye-catching aero, and an ingenious engine design, the ECV seemed to be the perfect Group S fit. We'll get to that. Lancia presented the car at the Bologna Motor Show in December 1986, 7 months after the cancellation of Group S was announced, to a positive public reception. In fact, Lancia kept experimenting with the ECV, shortening the tail, redesigning the rear wing, and placing a large double opening at the front to allow air that cooled the radiators to flow out. Such was the extent of the changes made that the new design was dubbed the ECV2 and draped in the martini livery with which Lancia had become synonymous. Of course, the ECV never turned a wheel in anger, but I doubt Lancia would have minded. Once the introduction of Group A was announced, the team realised that their Delta HF four-wheel drive, which had been released in April of 1986, was the perfect platform for the new regs. How perfect? Try 6 straight manufacturers' titles between 1987 and 1992. Despite being widely regarded as the clearest indication of what Group S might have been, the ECV's status is a bit more complicated than that. Its 1.8-litre turbocharged engine would not have conformed to the Group S regulations, as imagined by FISA Technical Commission President Gabriel Codringer. Lancia's decision to unveil a rally car they knew would never compete is puzzling, if we assume its purpose was indeed Group S Rally. The ECV, which literally stood for Experimental Composite Vehicle, was probably intended as more of a testbed on which Lancia could experiment with new materials and powertrains, and was not the perfect Group S illustration it's often credited as being. We'll continue this story after a short break. Gameloft have sponsored this section of the video to tell you about the new JDM Turbofest update for Asphalt Legends. Oh no, I did lose to a Mustang Mach-E! No! Oh, that's my career over? New cars, a new track, and a brand new drift game mode to lock into. Oh! Oh, not exactly the plan. If you don't already know about Asphalt Legends, I mean, come on. Really? It's a fun, free-to-play arcade-style racing game packed with action, jumps, and now your favourite JDM Legends too, with the R34 Skyline, Mark IV Supra, and FD RX-7 all making an appearance. I do love them. I know everyone does, but there's a reason. It's available on PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and mobile. You can buzz about with your friends on fun courses, now including Mount Fuji, in a staggering and growing selection of cool cars. Better yet, you can play anywhere, with the ability to easily pick up where you left off just by logging in from another device. So scan the QR code on screen or follow the link in the description to download Asphalt Legends for free. It's literally free. At least try and beat my drift score. Not that that's going to be too difficult. C rank. I reckon you could probably do better than that. Thanks again to Gameloft for sponsoring this section of the video, and now back to the story of Group S. Despite never being in contention for the World Championship, Toyota was a persistent presence in Group B thanks in large part to its rear-wheel drive Celica TCT, a reliable entrant that was a force to be reckoned with in the African endurance events. With 6 wins between 1983 and 1986, the TCT was often dubbed the King of Africa. But with the Group S regulations inbound, Toyota saw for themselves a new destiny. Set a bunch of money on fire to beat European companies they've been rinsing in the sales charts anyway. And so development of the 222D began. It sported a mid-mounted 2.1-litre 503E engine, a variant of which also powered several Toyota Group C races in the late 80s, space frame construction, and carbon Kevlar bodywork. Technically based on the Toyota MR2, the 222D was, in reality, a completely different animal. The donor car's passenger cell was the only meaningful carryover, and while the MR2 sported McPherson struts, the 222D had double wishbone suspension at the front and a multi-link setup at the rear. Toyota Team Europe actually developed 2 separate versions of their Group S prototype, one with 4-wheel drive and one with 2-wheel drive. By all accounts, its short wheelbase and mid-engine layout had the potential to make it one of the most potent cars of the era, but with only one functioning example in existence today, the 222D has been all but consigned to the history books. Having invested heavily in their RS200 for Group B, although some may say not heavily enough, Ford were keen to capitalise on the incoming Group S regulations. The abrupt cancellation of that rule set meant the end of that particular project. However, RS200 project chief John Wheeler was unwilling to let his vision die, and spent the best part of a decade building what he considers to be the definitive Group S RS200. Born out of a crash-damaged rallycross chassis, the RS200S ditched its predecessor's famed BDT 4-cylinder engine in favour of the BYD, not the Chinese one, unit that would later power the Sierra Cosworth, while the original Garrett T03 turbocharger made way for a Borg-Varner unit. In addition to sporting a new engine, the car's structural framework was comprehensively overhauled, along with a new removable subframe at the front. This improved overall rigidity and, when allied to the plastic Kevlar and carbon fibre bodywork, reportedly saved around 100 kilograms of weight, something I imagine Ford wished they'd thought of when developing the original. Beyond the new chassis, the car now sported twin dampers at all 4 corners. The gearbox was still mounted at the front as it was in the original RS200, but it was now a 6-speed sequential unit. Rearrangements in the engine bay meant the intercooler could now be mounted lower, improving the centre of gravity, while a roof-mounted Venturi duct improved overall cooling. In contrast to most other Group S prototypes, the RS200S was very much one man's labour of love. As admirable as that is, the result is a car that wasn't necessarily built to compete in Group S, but rather celebrate what the regulations could have spawned. It's currently a one-off. But as Wheeler himself has said, with demand for retro rally cars on the rise, a limited production run is a possibility. Apparently. Picture this, it's 1985. Dire Straits just released Brothers in Arms, one of my favourite albums ever, and Peugeot is decimating the opposition with the 205 T16. Audi has just unveiled the most extreme version of the Quattro, and the terminally unhinged twin-charged Delta S4 is mere months from debut. And amidst all this insanity and excitement, the absolute mad lads at Skoda turn up with a rear-engined, rear-wheel drive saloon car with less power than a Lancia starter motor and all the stability of a Nissan earnings report. I'm just as confused as you are. The Skoda 130 LR made its debut at the Velasca Zima Rally in 1985. Its 1.3-litre four-cylinder engine had an 8-port aluminium head, twin-Weber carbs, and produced 130 horsepower. That may have paled in comparison to the Group B heavyweights of the era, but with an aluminium bonnet, doors, and engine cover, the 130 LR tipped the scales at just 720 kilograms, around 360 kilograms less than that decadent Western Audi Quattro S1. But the lightness wasn't really enough. The little Skoda was a winner in its class, I'll be fair to them there, as within Group B there was a number of subclasses depending on vehicle spec, but the small displacement, super light Group B cars like Skoda's were never in the conversation for outright wins against the sport's heavyweights. Skoda were intent on climbing the ranks though, and with the announcement of Group S, they took the opportunity to develop something that wouldn't be outrun by spectators running from corner to corner. The initial plan was to use the Skoda Favourite as a base, but as production of the hatchback was delayed, the decision was made to augment the 130 LR. Rear ducts were added, as were additional air vents on the bonnet, the rear spoiler was revised to produce more downforce, but the events of May 1986 meant the car, now referred to as the 130 LR Evo, never contested the World Rally Championship. Sporadic show runs and a handful of replicas are now all we have to remember it by, but don't be too sad, it probably would have been shit. Audi. Yeah, I know you were waiting for this one. Audi turned rallying on its head in 1981 with its innovative four-wheel drive Quattro. However, by 1986, the German giants were starting to lag behind. The turbocharged 2.1-litre five-cylinder engine was as potent as ever, but Audi's insistence on positioning it ahead of the front axle meant the Quattro's handling characteristics were far from ideal. According to team manager Roland Gumpert, discussions over a possible mid-engine layout had been ongoing since as early as 1983, but many of the Audi higher-ups, most notably Ferdinand Piëch, had rejected the idea outright. An initial compromise was reached in the form of the Audi Sport Quattro, which had a shorter wheelbase and went on to claim the drivers' and manufacturers' titles in 1984. But as the likes of Peugeot and Lancia began to field highly competitive mid-engine contenders, it was clear a rethink was needed. It's worth mentioning that Audi's steadfast refusal to abandon the front-engine Quattro wasn't just down to ego or stubbornness. The company had staked its commercial reputation on the original Quattro concept and feared that a major technical sea change could be seen as them admitting they could not, in fact, bend the laws of physics to their will. However, after years of persistent requests, some of which came courtesy of star driver Walter Röhrl, Piëch tacitly approved the development of a mid-engine rally car, one that had to be developed without the knowledge of any Audi board members. As a result, Gumpert and his team were forced to work at the Desna test facility, around 200 miles north of Prague, in what was then Czechoslovakia. Permanent workshops were discreetly set up, while prototypes were shipped in containers marked Kenya Test to ward off suspicion. What resulted was a car commonly referred to as the RS001. I can't tell you its official name because it didn't get one, as the project never officially existed. Initial test cars resembled the Quattro, perhaps unsurprisingly, but sported a telltale duct on the roof to aid cooling of the mid-mounted 2.1-litre five-cylinder turbocharged engine. It was said to produce up to 400 brake horsepower with the boost turned up. Röhrl actually got to test the car, but with the project still under wraps, arranging said test was far from easy. After initially settling on Salzburg, Gumpert's crew caught wind of a group of journalists swarming the proposed site, thanks to an anonymous tip. The trucks were hastily redirected to an asphalt stretch in Bavaria. and it was there that Roll got his first taste of the mid-engined Quattro. The 1982 world champion praised the car's superior handling in tight corners and lauded its high-speed stability. If only Audi had listened years earlier. After being stopped by the police, who merely wanted a photo, which Roll declined in order to maintain the car's secrecy, the team was eventually outed by a clandestine photographer. Within 48 hours, news of these covert tests had reached the Audi bigwigs, and the whole project was swiftly dismantled. Or so it seemed. Years after the project fell apart, a second prototype surfaced. Unlike the RS001, which bore a strong resemblance to the Quattro, the car now known as the RS002 was by all accounts a more focused Group S rally car. Details on the car are scarce, with Gumpert himself unwilling to state whether or not the RS002 was ever an official project. But beneath that radically different fiberglass body lay the familiar turbocharged 5-cylinder engine that was now said to produce upwards of 690 brake horsepower at full boost. Of the 3 prototypes that are said to have been produced, one was destroyed, while another lives in Audi's museum. The fate of the third mid-engine Quattro remains a mystery. The abrupt cancellation of Group S meant we never got to see whether or not the long-awaited mid-engine Quattro could get Audi back to its winning ways. In contrast to their success in other motorsport disciplines, Mazda's time in Group B was far from memorable. In the mid-1980s, Mazda Team Europe, led by Achim Warmbold, set itself a clear objective: to produce the first rotary-powered rally car. What resulted was a Group B version of the FB RX-7. Having achieved homologation status in Groups 1, 2 and 4, Mazda had to produce just 20 road-going versions. Armed with a naturally aspirated 13B rotary engine that produced around 300 brake horsepower and revved at 10,000 RPM, the rear-wheel drive RX-7 did little to upset the established order. A third-place finish for Ingvar Carlsson at the Acropolis Rally in 1985 was the only real highlight, and prompted Mazda to make major changes in preparation for the upcoming Group S. Mazda switched to four-wheel drive and four-wheel steering, virtually unheard of in rallying at the time. However, details on the prototypes are scarce, and given the 2 surviving cars' sparse interior, it's safe to say they weren't extensively developed before the cancellation of Group S. As was the case for many manufacturers, Lada's development cycle encompassed both Group B and... Wait, Lada were involved? Apparently yes. The story goes that in 1984, workers at a truck factory in Tallinn repurposed a side room to secretly develop a rally car. Allegedly codenamed the Lada Turbo, it used the Samara as a foundation. However, Lada ditched everything bar the hatchback's headlights, doors and windscreen. It housed a mid-mounted 1.9-litre twin-cam 4-cylinder engine, as well as a fiberglass body. I mean, goddamn, they were ahead of Audi. The prototype had extra vents cut into the rear arches, and featured a striking dual-element rear wing and tubular chassis. Mind you, it was only rear-wheel drive. Initially developed under wraps, news of the car reached Soviet officials in 1986, who were impressed with Lada's efforts and, much to the dismay of everyone working there presumably, turned it into a government-backed project. Lithuanian rally driver Stasys Brunza was appointed as the project's director, and it was under his watch that the project was moved to the factory in Vilnius, Lithuania, the same facility that birthed the Lada VFTS rally car in 1980. This was reflected in the Group B prototype's name, EVA, which stood for Experimental Vilnius Auto Plant. Lada even had an eye on Group S, with a more powerful version of the 4-cylinder in development. However, the abrupt cancellation of both rule sets meant the team's effort came to naught, as did the car now known as the Samara S Proto. At the start of the 1980s, Opel were a force to be reckoned with. In the capable hands of Walter Röhrl, the Ascona 400 was able to clinch the 1982 Drivers' Championship, despite the best efforts of Michel Mouton and Audi. Its successor, the Manta, secured 3 podiums between 1983 and 1984, but without four-wheel drive, it never challenged for a world title. Opel realised that a purpose-built rally car was the only way forward, and set about preparing its Kadett hatchback for the transformation. It sported a tubular space frame, as well as disc brakes all round. The team experimented with turbo and supercharging on the front-mounted 4-cylinder engine, and though they never contested the World Rally Championship, at least 3 of the 4 prototypes did have competitive outings. 2 contested the 1986 Paris-Dakar Rally, finishing 33rd and 36th overall, but beyond that, there's just not that much more to say. Peugeot owned Group B in 1985. The iconic 205 T16 won 7 of that year's 12 rallies. Timo Salonen waltzed to the driver's title, while the manufacturer's crown was frankly inevitable. With that kind of momentum, Peugeot were in no mood to let up for Group S. However, they felt there was a significant obstacle standing between them and further domination: their car's wheelbase. Despite its appearance, the 205 was actually one of the longest cars in the field, but Peugeot wanted to make it even longer in order to improve stability. However, there was no feasible way of doing this without creating a car that bore virtually no resemblance to the one it was based on, or rather, even less than it already did. Salvation eventually came in the form of the upcoming 405 Saloon, which had a wheelbase 130mm longer than that of the 205 T16. The 205's tubular steel spaceframe chassis was carried over, albeit slightly modified in accordance with the new length, while the 1.8-litre four-cylinder engine was bored out to 1.9 litres. The 405 Group S featured some new, and hopefully legal, aero in the form of a front splitter and rear wing, but of course never got to compete in a Group S World Rally Championship season. However, the 405 T16 had arguably the most productive life of any Group S prototype. Banned from entering the World Rally Championship, Peugeot took modified versions of their 405 to both Pikes Peak and the Paris-Dakar Rally. Ari Vatanen broke the Pikes Peak record in 1988 with a time of 10 minutes and 47 seconds, and took the overall win at Dakar in 1989 and 1990. Not bad for a man who nearly lost his life in a terrifying accident at Rally Argentina in 1985, and not bad for a car designed for a rule set that got scrapped before it ever raced. Unlike most Group S prototypes that were either destroyed or left to gather dust, the 405 T16 was still able to build an enviable legacy elsewhere. Such was Peugeot's mastery of the art of rally at the time. Remember when I said Group S was designed to encourage radical new concepts? These guys got the memo. Seat Sport was founded in 1985 with the aim of enhancing the company's reputation through motorsport, and initially targeted the Spanish Gravel Rally Championship. Four-wheel drive was a must, but with a limited budget the team couldn't develop a conventional system. Their solution, which I'm absolutely astonished was actually cheaper, was to construct a car with 2 engines. Oh, seriously. Nearly a decade before Nobuhiro Tajima was hurling his twin-engine Suzuki Cultus up Pikes Peak, Seat were experimenting with the same tech on a shoestring budget. The Ibiza bimotor had 2 1.5-litre four-cylinder engines that produced 125 horsepower each. Their combined output may have been less than the 300 horsepower limit, but a 1,000-kilo curb weight went some of the way to make up for it. Housing the 2 engines was unsurprisingly tricky. The motor at the front tended to rev higher, and syncing the 2 transmissions was an ordeal. The radiators had 2 air ducts mounted near the rear windows, and such was the extent of Seat's financial woes that only the bonnet, rear hatch and arch extensions were made of fiberglass, while the rest was just left as steel. Debates still rage over whether or not the Ibiza bimotor was intended for Group B or Group S. What is certain is that manufacturing the 200 road-going versions required for Group B would have been tantamount to financial suicide. I mean, imagine having to sell a family car with an engine in the boot. It's safe to say it was more likely a Group S car than anything else. With that in mind, it's probably safer to say it likely was a Group S car. The lower power output and the fact they would have only had to make 10 makes it make a little bit more sense. The Ibiza never made it to the World Rally Championship, but it did achieve a 1-2 finish at the RACE Avila Rally in 1987. Wow. Group S remains one of motorsport's greatest what-ifs, but these surviving prototypes, many of which make occasional outings to this day, give us a rare glimpse into what would have been a fascinating era for the sport, one in which some of the greatest manufacturers in the world could stretch their legs without the shackles of road homologation, at least in the same way, and push the limits of what late 1980s engineering could achieve. Thanks for watching, check out Automobilistic on Spotify, and until next time, goodbye.